Just recently, I had one of my viewers comment that he would like to see a knife sharpening video of mine. And I remember some years back creating a knife sharpening video. Unfortunately, I'd put it under a different channel name. At that time, I was calling myself Texas Cooking, and that was an infringement upon someone else's deal. So mine changed to Texas Cooking Today, and that was when a lot of my videos changed. Anyway, I realized just recently that I have no knife sharpening video, and I need to get something like that out because this gentleman told me that he had sent his knives back to the factory to get them resharpened, that his knives weren't sharp and they weren't staying sharp. And so what I decided to do was to do a video on knife sharpening, but also to teach you. I want to teach exactly why knives seem to lose their edge quickly, especially on certain types of very high-end knives that have very narrow blades with extremely sharp edges. Now I'm talking, like my knives, the Shun knives, the Japanese knives that are very, very sharp. And you really can't understand how sharp they are until you've taken one and cut into something firm like a potato, and it just instantly glides through the potato with no effort, and you realize how sharp they are. Well, when that goes away, then you're left with something that feels dull, and you rub the edge and it feels dull, so there is no sharp feeling to it. What's happening there is that edge is actually bending, it's curving over. And I'm going to give you an illustration in just a moment of what's actually going on there. I'll draw it out on paper. And then I'm going to show you how that's corrected and then how to sharpen your knife. Because truly, knives don't become dull very fast unless they're being abused or used in some wrong way. Knives have extremely sharp metal for that edge, and or extremely hard metal that's quite sharpenable. The metal, even though it's hard, when it becomes so thin, it becomes extremely malleable, meaning it'll bend easy. And so I'm going to teach you how that happens, what's going on, how to fix that, and then how to determine whether your knife actually needs sharpening once that deficiency is corrected. So this is about knife sharpening. We're going to get into some details here. So if you're just looking at a fast method, well, this video is going to drive you nuts, because I'm going to teach you why your knife seems dull and get your thinking on the right path so that you know how to sharpen them the right way. And also, this is so important, how often to sharpen them. I use my knives a lot, a whole lot. Because of that heavy use, the blade seems to be dull frequently, but I know how to fix that so that sharpening isn't necessary. I understand what's going on, and I'm going to teach you exactly what's going on your knife and why this is happening. The gentleman that wrote me has the same kind of knives that I do, so get ready. I'm going to show you exactly what you need to do with those knives. This isn't hard. Let's get in the kitchen, and I'm going to show you a few things. Come on. Here we are in the kitchen. Now, one of my viewers wrote to me. He mentioned that he has knives like mine, but he was having a hard time keeping them sharp. He used an electric knife sharpener, and that recently, because he's had such a hard time keeping them sharp, he sent the knives back to the factory to get the correct bevel reinstalled on the knife and get them back to where they need to be. Jerry, this video is in response to what you have basically discussed with me, which is the fact that you've got your knives, that they've been giving you problems, and that they get dull quickly. There's a reason that your knife gets dull quickly, and I'm going to show you that reason today. The reason knives get dull, okay, and I'm going to take this knife as an example. I'm going to assume that this knife is dull, okay, and I check the edge. You see people do this right here, and they do this right here. And what they're doing is they're feeling the amount of drag that edge has on their fingers. Same as if you were using a shaving blade, then you would feel that blade scratch against the skin at the right angle. And you know, the more drag you feel, the sharper that blade is. Okay, so the increased drag is simply the edge grabbing a hold and wanting to cut in. So you have to be very careful about doing something like that. Here's the thing. There's different kinds of edges on knives, all right? Most of the time when a knife is having problems and it seems like it's dull, it's not actually dull. Most of the time when a knife seems dull, it's because the edge is bent over, okay? Now I have, right behind me here, a nice little sheet of paper that has some pictures of the edges. Now I took some photographs of this earlier. Let's take a close look at the photograph. The first one I want to look at is on the left-hand side. We see Western and Eastern. Now what I'm talking about there is there's basically two different kinds of bevels on knife edges. The Western bevel comes from a wider blade and is a shorter bevel. It is, your Western bevel is actually 20 degrees. And so and this picture is exaggerated, it's not drawn to scale, but you can see that it's a tighter bevel, okay? The Eastern bevel on a narrower blade, it's 15 degrees, so it's not cocked in nearly as far. It's much more pointed, essentially. There's also a third edge when it comes to Eastern bevel, and that is what we call a single bevel. Some knives are single bevel, while most knives are double bevel. In case you're wondering, what is the difference between a single and a double bevel? Well, if it is sharpened on both sides of the blade, that's a double bevel. If you sharpen it only on one side of the blade, that is a single bevel. It's a rare thing to see single bevels on knives. Most of the ones I've seen come out of Japan. They're Japanese knives. They're very high-end shoe knives, generally have hand-folded blades and extremely hard core metal, and they're very unique knives. And they're made by masters of the craft. The Japanese people are very good when it comes to steel and how to make it very hard and how to make it extremely sharp. So the thing of it is that single bevel, you can make it a lot sharper. It's got some downfalls. It has a tendency to cut sideways, and so you know it doesn't cut straight the way a single bevel does. Most people that aren't aware of it end up messing up their blades because they don't understand how to sharpen it. You can only sharpen one side on that knife, and if you try to sharpen two sides, then you're going to injure your blade. Now on the right hand side of the little drawing that I've made, you can see where right at the very tip of those drawings, and they're exaggerated once again and not to scale, it shows how that end is bent over. Most of the time when your knife is feeling dull, and you check the blade, and you know when you pull your fingers across it, it feels dull like this, and then you pull your fingers across it on the other side, it still feels dull, and you're like, okay, well the knife is dull, it needs to be sharpened. That's the natural instinct when you feel it, but a lot of times it's just bent over, and that's why we use this little device. This is called a home steel. Home steels are a really cool item. They allow you to take the blade of the knife and straighten it back out. So what we're doing on a home steel, we're not trying to push the blade into it like we would a sharpening stone. We're not doing this. We're pulling across it like this. And what that does is it brings that curved edge back up to straight. That's the idea behind honing. Honing does not sharpen a blade at all. It only aligns the edge. That edge, when it gets bent over, needs to be bent back. Even if it's true that the edge has become dull, you still need to align it before you try to sharpen it. That's a must-do. If you don't, you're going to end up grinding off a whole lot more of that edge. Suddenly, with what little I did to this, I'm feeling a sharper edge on my knife, which means it's not dull, it's out of alignment. I sharpen my blades 4 times a year. I use them a lot. I do recipe development, and I'm constantly making videos for YouTube. And you've seen how these get used, how hard they get used. I'm serious with my knives, and so they get hard, serious abuse. And as a result, the edges get bent over. One lady, one of my viewers, she scolded me for when I slide materials that I've cut over on the board using my knife. She said, when you drag that knife edge across the board, it dulls it. I'm not worried about it dulling it because it's an extremely hard metal. But what it will do is it'll bend it over and make it seem dull and act like it's dull. A bent over edge will be just the same as a dull knife until you've straightened it. Now, in the same message that Jerry sent me, he was discussing the fact that to sharpen his knives, he uses an electric sharpener. You'll find out in time as you watch my videos. Oh wow, I hate electric knife sharpeners. You want to butcher your knife? Buy an electric knife sharpener. It's a great way to do it. The problem is with an electric knife sharpener, you have to take the blade angle into consideration. Do you have a 15-degree or a 20-degree angle on your blade? Does your blade have a western or an eastern angle on the cut? I have 2 knives here. This one, Western design. This one, Eastern design. Thicker blade. Right back here, the back of that knife, and I don't like getting this close to my face, but the back of the knife here, wide compared to the back of the knife there. Okay, you can see that very clearly. The thickness makes it much harder and rigid. You don't have to worry about breaking these knives nearly as much. These can be snapped fairly easily because they're very brittle and thin. However, that thin knife allows you to sharpen it, and when it's sharpened the right way to a 15-degree bevel, that narrower blade gives you less resistance, and with the extra long edge and extra sharp edge, they cut like no other knife. So you'll get a lot of praise on these Shun knives because of that. Now, you've got a 15-degree bevel here and a 20-degree bevel here, which means it's that tighter bevel. And so most of your electric sharpeners will do good because most of them are set up for a 15-degree bevel. But if you use it on this knife, you're going to muck it up really bad. If you have single bevel Shun knives and you use an electric knife sharpener, you better make sure it's designed for a single bevel, If it's not a single bevel, guess what? You've just messed up your knife. Here's the thing, I think it's really best to learn the right way to sharpen your own knives, and that's what I'm going to show you today. I've got stones out for sharpening, and I'm going to teach you how they're used, but I'm also going to teach you how to use a honed steel. So let's take a close-up look at some of these skills. Come up a little closer, we're going to get serious about this. Come on. Now, before we get into using a honed steel and learning why the edges are the way they are, I have a piece of foil out here, and I wanted to use this as a demonstration. If I were to take a bar of aluminum, it would be rigid and hard, just the same way this thing is, okay? That aluminum, when pressed and rolled out, repeatedly gets thinner and thinner, and even though it was once hard, it then, by being worked, becomes malleable and thin, okay, like this. And that's the thing, is the edge on your knife becomes so thin, it gets to the point where, yeah, it'll just curve over with use. It'll bend right over. And that natural flexi ability that metal has, the malleable side of metal, when it's really thin, you know, the same way this foil is, makes it flex or bend. All right, so even though knife blades are commonly extremely hard, well, they have their characteristics, okay? And one of those characteristics is they curl. Okay, now, I want to show you something. First thing is, I want to give you a warning. If you touch the edge of a knife, you will most likely get cut, so don't ever do that. If you ever run your hand lengthwise down that edge, you're going to cut yourself wide open. People who test it like this, they do that. That's fine. There's other ways you can test it, like the paper cut method. We'll get into that in a minute, and that's just where you plunge a knife into paper and it either cuts it or it doesn't. If it tears it, you know the knife is dull. So another way of testing a blade to see if it's curled is you can push your fingers away from that edge like this. And if one side feels rough and the other side feels smooth, then it is bent over. And this edge right here is actually bent over. My test feels smooth here and it feels rough here, which means this is curled that direction. So when I feel it like this, because it's curled, it doesn't feel sharp the way it should. And that's what we're going to fix with the honed steel. Now, the idea of a honed steel is you don't do it the way you do a knife, where you push it into the stone like this in order to sharpen it. On a honed steel, you pull it across like this. So we're going across, and we do the same thing on the bottom side. Now, you'll see some chefs will do it this way, all right? And that's okay if you're brave enough to, but I've always been taught that pointing a knife towards you is not a smart thing, so you're better off doing it like this. And that honed steel will work the same either way. So I'm pulling it across like this. And the reason we go back and forth from side to side is because as that curl gets brought into alignment, in other words, as it's brought back up to straight instead of being bent over, then we don't want it to go too far. And we want it to not, waver back and forth like this. So we run it down both sides, back and forth, so it makes it straight, it doesn't waver back and forth, and it pulls it back into alignment. So that's what they mean by you're pulling your blade into an alignment by using one of those. And then boom, suddenly, and I'm feeling this, suddenly this is back to, ooh, sharp, sharp. And it's not that this sharpened it, it was that it was already sharpened, it just needed to be brought back to where it should be. Okay, that's how your honed steel works, why your honed steel works, and why you should use it. If you're going to sharpen your knives, always use a honed steel first. If that edge is bent over, you're going to have to grind it completely off before you can regrind a whole new edge, and that's just extra work, and you're wasting metal on your knife and wearing it out sooner than it should be worn out. All right? Now, there's really no difference in doing this type of knife versus this type. Even though they have two different tapers, two different bevels on the edge, there's no difference in using the hone because you're not, again, you're not sharpening, you're pulling it into alignment. My, my oldest stone is this thing here. And it has, if you'll notice, it's thicker on the ends than in the middle. I've used it that much over the years that I've worn it down that much. And I have blades, certain knives, where the blades are curved in on the center of them. Let me get one here, an older knife. Oh, here's one of the older knives, and if you notice, it curves down in the center of the blade, and that comes from repeated sharpening. Not electric sharpening, we're talking sharpening on stones by hand, which is the way I was taught and the way I believe in doing it. There's old style stones and new style stones, and I've got both. I've got just a plain good old-fashioned, these are called Arkansas whetstones. It's a type of sandstone that's really hard and tightly compressed, and it makes for good knife sharpening. And so we would take our knife and push it down that stone, working the knife on both sides. Okay? And doing this until the knife is brought back into sharp again. And of course that takes time and it's some serious work. Alright, now I've got a blade here that needs to be sharpened. We're going to say this needs a sharp edge on it. I could use something like this, and it's going to take me probably 10 to 15 minutes if this is truly quite dull. And this is a medium whetstone, by the way. Now I have another stone here that's a natural stone also, and this is what they call a black stone or a surgical black. They are very, very smooth to the touch. The idea here of this stone is once you've got a fine edge on it, you can use this to polish that edge to make it very bright and shiny, and to also add the finishing touch to a sharp edge to make it just that much more sharp. That's a black stone, and that's what they're used for. A lot of people will call this a surgical black, and it gets that name because for a long time when surgeons would sharpen their own scalpels, they would use this type of stone to set a really sharp edge on their scalpels. These days the scalpel edges, it's a disposable item, okay, so they don't see it quite the same now. Modern stones, and these are the ones I really love the most. Many years back, a gentleman I was speaking to insisted to me that these stones would truly sharpen my knives many times faster than the natural stones would do. I kind of scoffed at him. I didn't really believe it, but I wanted to try them, so I bought some. I have used them over and over and over throughout the years. These are a sheet of metal with diamonds embedded in it. I have a coarse and I have a medium right here, and they will put a very, very fine edge on a knife, and they will do it very quickly. Now, if it looks like your knife would catch on that edge, it really does not. Let me show you what I mean. These, when you push a knife across that, then you're going to get a smooth cut. And that's an important thing. We want that bevel to be right. Now, over the years, I've had to learn how to get the right bevel on a knife. Do I do a high bevel like this, which is the Western style, or do I bring it down like this, which is the Eastern style? And that is the way I have to do this one. I have to bring it down low so I can get a tight edge on it. Now, if you'll notice, even the smaller stone will accommodate in a very large knife. If you'll notice, that stone does not move either. That stone doesn't move because it's got rubber feet underneath the little base that is holding it. These are really practical, and I love them for their practical side, okay? Now, for many years, I sharpened knives just like this. And I can still do it, and I can do it fast. I like to do it slow so you can see what I'm doing. But it's all in learning how much to bring that edge up, and you can't hold it absolutely perfect every time. but you get it in the ballpark as close as possible, and you learn that certain knives need a higher angle like this and other knives need a lower angle. And the best way to know is practice. A knife like this with an edge that stains is a perfect knife to practice with, because you can push that into the stone. Let me do this a few times, and suddenly you've got an edge that you can see clearly, and you can see the amount of angle that you're going to have on that edge. Should you bring it up more or should you lower it? What kind of edge are you getting compared to what you're supposed to have? Now, if you've already can see the original edge, all you have to do is teach yourself to match the original edge. And what you're doing is you're looking at the back edge of the knife here. You're looking at the gap between the stone and the bottom edge of the back of the knife, because that's where you see the right angle. All right? Just like that. Now, if I do it like this, you see that is low. That's like that Eastern style. But if I bring it up like this, then I'm more in that Western style. So you see it's a difference between this and this, and it's a subtle difference. That's the thing you have to learn about doing your own by hand. You can see some of the Japanese masters who will take a stone that's about an inch wider than this and twice the length of this, and they will, with it nice and wet, push the knives directly into it like this, and they'll work it multiple times on one edge, and then they'll turn it over and they'll do the same thing, just like this, pushing it into that stone. When they push it in, they lift it up and then push it into it again, like this. Get that out of my way. All right, and this is to help steady that knife so you can even push. So that smaller stone does not keep me from working my knives the exact same way. And don't be afraid of getting a 6-inch stone or 7 or 8-inch stone, because folks, they don't have to be a 12 or 14-inch bed stone. All right. Another thing, these are called wet stones. They call them wet stones because they work well when they're wet. You can use 2 different items on a wet stone. You can use water on it, okay? So just put water on it. And the idea there is, as the knife is pushed across the stone, it keeps metal from getting built up in the surface of it, which will impede how well the stone cuts. You can use water on natural stones or on these, which are man-made. You can use oil, but you have to use the right kind of oil. Don't use cooking oil, all right? Use mineral oil. Mineral oil is the same thing you treat a wood top like this with, and that is because it preserves it without going rancid. If I were to use olive oil or some other form of vegetable oil, it would go rancid and make my board smell bad. Well, you don't use vegetable oils on your stone, because the same reason, in natural stone, that oil will soak in. It'll make your stone go rancid. You don't want that. So use mineral oil on it, and I've noticed the oil actually breaks the metal free from the natural stones way better than water does. So consider using mineral oil. There you have it. You've got the best of my knowledge on how to sharpen a knife, what to do before you sharpen a knife as far as aligning that edge. And remember, most of the time when it seems dull, you need to get the home steel and align the edge. It only takes a few seconds to do that. Now, it needs to be mentioned, if you're terribly worried about the angle of the knife to the edge on a home steel, as I said, you're not sharpening it, so you're not changing that bevel. So if it's high when you pull it across it or lower when you pull it across it, makes no difference. That you're pulling it across it, that is what makes the difference. And that is what makes that edge sharp again, not because you're sharpening it, but because you're just getting it back to not being bent over. All right, there it is. Enjoy sharpening your knives. It's not a hard thing to do. If you keep them sharp like I do, hey, it's like I said, 4 times a year, to do all of my knives, and there are, see, that's 7 knives that I sharpen, because 7 knives I use regularly. And it doesn't take me any time at all to do that. I usually take maybe 10, sometimes 12 minutes to get all 7 knives done, because I keep them sharp and keep them honed properly. The few times I sharpen them takes only a few minutes, and these diamond stones are what speeds up the process. Electric knife sharpeners. No. They do so much damage. They really do. Knife manufacturers love it when their customers use electric knife sharpeners. After all, it guarantees that you're going to be back in a few years to buy some new knives. Won't that be nice? Listen, if you don't want that, if you want your knives to last a lifetime, for heaven's sakes, just use a honed steel, and then occasionally when they really are dull, touch them up on the sharpening stone and move on. It doesn't take long, it's easy to do, and folks, it's just something that everyone should do with their knives. A dull knife is a dangerous knife. In the event that you're wondering, what does he mean, a dull knife is a dangerous knife? Okay, here's how it works. If you have something, let's say, that's very sinewy, that you're having a hard time cutting through. If you have a very sharp knife, you don't have a hard time cutting through it. It just gently glides through that sinewy item. The sinewy item is hard to cut through because your blade is either out of alignment or dull, and as a result, you're having to fight the blade. A really sharp blade is more likely to cut you than a dull blade. You hear people say this and they're like, why would I want a sharp knife? That's more dangerous. He's wrong. So here's how it works. You're fighting that item that's all sinewy and hard to cut through, and you've got both hands on the knife and you're trying to grind your way through it, and suddenly it goes through. But the knife goes ballistic because you had so much force behind it. Suddenly you now have your left arm with a knife impaled in between the 2 bones and sticking out the other side, and it was because of the force behind the knife, not how sharp it was. That sharp knife cut through the meat so easily that there was no force behind it to cause damage to anyone or anything. Sharp knives may be more likely to cut you, but that's a band-aid. A dull knife is a trip to the hospital emergency room. Sharp knife safe, dull knife dangerous. Please remember that rule. Thank you for watching Texas Cooking Today. Please take a look at the rest of what I have on Texas Cooking Today. Lots and lots of recipes, tutorials, and if you're not into all of the extra teaching, go with the previous episode. That's the recipe version, much shorter than the tutorials. It just shows you the recipe and you get to figure out how to do it. But the tutorial makes sure that you don't have to figure out anything. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this. If you would, like I said, look in the description box. There's links. You'll see my website there. That's where I sell things like Texas Cooking Today caps. That's where I sell my recipes. Pretty soon we'll have aprons, t-shirts for Texas Cooking Today. Other shirts like this I already have for sale. And folks, a lot of good stuff. Thank you for visiting, and thank you for watching this video. And please keep your knives good and sharp so they'll be good and safe. Thank you.